What if the greatest secret of King Solomon wasn't written in the Bible, but hidden in the shadows of the mountains? What if the man celebrated for his wisdom also founded a school not for saints, but for vampires? It sounds impossible, almost blasphemous, doesn't it? And yet, in the heart of Romanian folklore, the whispers are too persistent to ignore. They speak of a place buried in the Carpathian Mountains, a place where the boundary between light and darkness was shattered, where disciples learned not only to command storms, but to drink eternity itself. This is not the Solomon you've heard about in Sunday school. This is a different Solomon, a master of occult forces whose hidden disciples preserved a tradition the church tried desperately to bury. A tradition where blood wasn't sin, but scripture. Where initiation wasn't about prayers, but about fangs. And the more you listen, the more you'll feel that these aren't just stories for campfires. They're pieces of a puzzle that was never meant to be solved. Tonight, we're opening that puzzle together. We're stepping inside the forbidden legend of SOLOMONARI, the school of vampires of King Solomon hidden in the mountains of Romania. And once you cross this threshold, you may never look at Solomon or the night the same way again. 1. A hidden legacy, the forbidden school of Solomon. What if King Solomon's wisdom had a side that history tried to bury? A knowledge so powerful it could not be confined to temples or scriptures. In the whispers of Romanian folklore, there is talk of a hidden school of Solomon, a place where light and shadow walked side by side. Imagine disciples being trained not just in sacred law, but in the mysteries of the unseen, where chants could bend storms and symbols could command beasts. The Carpathian Mountains were said to cradle this forbidden school, their mist concealing truths that priests feared and peasants dared not speak aloud. And in that obscurity, a tradition began to stir, one that would blur the line between magicians and something far darker. Some call them the SOLOMONARI, figures cloaked in black who traveled with a strange confidence as though they carried secrets too old for the church to touch. Legends whisper that they studied under the direct shadow of King Solomon occult, inheriting not only his wisdom, but also his forbidden arts. They were said to know how to summon storms, heal the sick, and yet also curse entire villages. It's unsettling, isn't it? How power can wear both faces at once, savior and destroyer. Think about it. Every culture has its gifted outcasts, people who walk just outside the accepted path. The SOLOMONARI were no different. Only their school was hidden and their lessons unspeakable. The stories go further, suggesting that this was not just a secret school of magicians, but something even more sinister. A vampire school hidden in plain sight. Why vampires? Because knowledge, like blood, can be consumed, passed on, and corrupted. In these tales, disciples were not given scrolls, they were given blood rituals as textbooks, with veins as the ink. This was the occult Romania rarely shown in churches, but whispered in firesides across villages. The line between sorcery and hunger blurred, leaving behind a chilling possibility that the greatest school of wisdom might also have been a cradle of the undead. Imagine yourself standing in a remote monastery ruin, stones blackened with age, the wind howling like a hymn gone wrong. That's where villagers claimed the vampire occultism of the SOLOMONARI was nurtured. Some swore they saw pale figures disappear into the mountain caves, carrying lanterns whose flames never dimmed. Others said they heard chanting under the earth, where the mountain's belly echoed with the sound of ritual. Whether myth or memory, the Carpathian secrets have a way of clinging to anyone who listens too closely. And if you've ever stood in a storm that seemed to answer to no one, you might wonder, was someone still practicing that hidden craft? It's easy to dismiss these legends as mere imagination, yet every rumor carries a seed of truth. Even modern explorers who wander through Transylvanian legends find themselves tangled in tales of strange marks carved into stone, sigils that resemble the Solomon's seal. Could these be remnants of that ancient sorcery carved by disciples of the forbidden school? Think about universities today, books, halls, professors. Now flip it. Imagine a university hidden in caves, its lessons whispered, its exams marked in blood. That's the kind of education the Solomonari myths point toward. A school unlike anything we'd recognize, and yet strangely believable. You see, legends of the Solomon's hidden disciples are not just about magic, they're about power. And power has always been both tempting and terrifying. For some, it was a chance to rise above poverty, to command storms instead of fearing them. For others, it was the lure of immortality, a life beyond the fragile span of flesh. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how far someone would go for knowledge that promised eternity. Would you risk it if the price wasn't coins or prayers, but blood? That's the paradox of dark folklore Romania. Knowledge is never free, and the Solomonari knew it too well. And here's where the loop pulls us deeper. If such a forbidden school of Solomon really existed, and if its teachings stretched beyond mere magic into the realm of vampirism, then what happened to its disciples? Did they vanish into myth, or did they carry their teachings into the present, hidden behind new masks? Whispers of their survival persist, and it is those whispers that lead us to the next revelation. 2. The myth of the Solomonari, carriers of ancient power. The peasants of old Romania didn't invent the Solomonari myths out of thin air. They spoke of tall, pale men who seemed to walk between worlds, carrying staffs carved with symbols no priest could bless away. These weren't ordinary magicians. They were said to be the direct hidden disciples of Solomon, inheritors of the King Solomon occult tradition. Imagine a traveler pausing at an inn in Transylvania, only to be told by trembling locals, "Beware, the Solomonari are near, they command the storm." In those nights, thunder was not simply nature's voice, but the echo of someone's ritual in the Carpathian Mountains, a reminder that the natural and the supernatural were never truly separate. Legends say the Solomonari carried an authority that defied kings and bishops alike. They were described as wanderers who could heal wounds with one hand and strike sickness with the other. Their initiation into this secret school of magicians wasn't just about memorizing sacred texts. It was about bending reality itself. One tale describes a Solomonari who calmed a raging river so an entire village could cross safely. But in the same story, that same man summoned hail the size of fists to punish a town that mocked him. That duality, healer and destroyer, is what made them both revered and feared. It's no wonder that whispers of their existence still thread through Romanian magic even today. Perhaps the most fascinating and terrifying aspect of their legend is their supposed bond with dragons. Yes, dragons, not as fairy tales, but as living forces tied to the storms themselves. The Solomonari and vampires often share the same breath in folklore, but before their vampiric associations, they were painted as riders of dragons, able to twist the weather with a single chant. If that seems unbelievable, remember that for villagers whose crops depended on every drop of rain, the man who could summon or stop a storm was indistinguishable from a god. Power like that can make anyone unforgettable, and the occult legends of Solomon only grow darker when you realize what else they were accused of. Picture this: a young peasant boy is taken from his village, chosen because of a strange birthmark, or a dream that lingered too vividly. He is whisked away to a monastery deep in the forest, where he learns not prayers but forbidden knowledge. His teachers, the Solomonari, show him how to inscribe the Solomon's seal onto iron plates, how to call thunder with the rhythm of his breath, how to command beasts that shouldn't exist. Years later, when he returns, his own mother doesn't recognize him. He's taller, colder, and his eyes glow like storm clouds. That's the kind of story the elders whispered, and it made every crack of lightning a little more personal. You see, these weren't simply wizards in the way stories like to romanticize. They were initiates into a legacy that carried both ancient sorcery and a shadow of damnation. Some claimed the Solomonari could vanish into caves where no torch burned. Others swore they walked with wolves that obeyed only their call. And while the church tried to brand them as heretics, villagers often begged them for rain in the middle of droughts, slipping bread, cheese, and sometimes even goats in exchange for their blessings. It's a paradox, feared as devils, yet needed as saviors. The same paradox that surrounds every story of the school of vampires, later tied to them. It's worth noting that the Solomonari were never fully human in people's minds. They were liminal figures, halfway between man and spirit, day and night. Think of them like the storm shamans of other cultures, except theirs had a unique stamp, the shadow of esoteric Solomon himself. And when someone carries that kind of name, the legends don't just fade, they multiply. Today, scholars argue about whether they were just remnants of pre-Christian shamans, absorbed and demonized by Christian narratives. But to the people who swore they saw them, they were neither past nor metaphor. They were real as the rain pounding on their rooftops. And so, the Solomonari stand as carriers of occult Romania, guardians of Carpathian secrets, and reminders that wisdom is rarely just light. It always casts shadows. Their legacy wasn't about spells in dusty tomes, but about living power that could crush or cradle, depending on the hand that wielded it. But here's the unsettling thought. If these magicians were once dragon riders, how did they become entangled with the far darker image of vampires? That transformation is the next shadow we need to step into. 3. From magicians to vampires, the dark transformation. It's one thing to speak of magicians who call storms, but another to whisper that those same men may have crossed into vampiric night. The Solomonari myth slowly shifted in the stories of peasants, evolving from respected sorcerers into beings tied to hunger, shadow, and blood. In the depths of Romanian folklore, the line blurred. Were these disciples of Solomon merely wielders of ancient sorcery, or had they entered into something more, something predatory? When knowledge is consumed like blood, the teacher becomes a feeder, and the student a vessel. This is how the vampire school was born in legend, carved out of awe and fear. The connection between Solomon's hidden disciples and vampirism might sound outrageous, but folklore is rarely random. Villagers told of initiates who returned from the hidden school of Solomon with pale skin, piercing eyes, and an appetite for silence that unsettled even their kin. They didn't age like normal men, and some swore they could vanish into mist when danger pressed too close. If knowledge is life, then drinking knowledge could resemble drinking blood, both sustaining, both transforming. This was the paradox of the King Solomon occult heritage. It promised wisdom, but at a cost that turned men into something else. Think of it like this. Every culture has a story of power that corrupts. In Rome, emperors became gods. In Egypt, pharaohs were seen as immortal. In Transylvania, however, power didn't make you divine. It made you vampiric. The Carpathian secret suggests that some Solomonari chose not to wield storms or dragons, but to embrace a darker ritual, consuming life itself as a way of carrying forbidden teachings forward. And doesn't that sound eerily similar to how knowledge is passed in bloodlines, sealed not with ink, but with veins? It makes you wonder if the metaphor wasn't hiding something literal. In this sense, vampirism wasn't about bats and coffins. That came later with Gothic novels. No, the vampire occultism of the Solomonari was subtler, closer to the idea of absorbing vitality through sacred blood rituals. A disciple might be offered the blood of his master, believing it carried wisdom too vast for words. And once that seal was made, he wasn't just a man anymore. He belonged to the school of vampires, bound by a pact that no priest could undo. Isn't it ironic? The church drank wine as a symbol of divine blood, while in the mountains, another ritual was taking place, one that mocked, mirrored, and subverted it. Even the Solomon seal itself took on a new role in these stories. No longer just a mark of authority over spirits, it became the sigil that bound bloodlines, a key to anchor the vampiric transformation. Folklore hints at symbols carved into skin, glowing when the rite was performed. The hexagram was not only geometry, but a bridge between man and night. And when villagers found strange markings in caves, they whispered that it was proof of the occult Romania that priests pretended didn't exist. Symbols outlast flesh. Perhaps that's why these marks still haunt ruins today. What's fascinating is how seamlessly the dark folklore Romania wove vampirism into its magical traditions. While Western Europe painted vampires as monsters, Romania painted them as students, initiates of a higher knowledge. To call someone SOLOMONARI was to admit they weren't entirely human anymore. Their wisdom had edges, their rituals had fangs. And unlike fairy tales, these weren't stories for children. They were warnings for adults who might be tempted by promises too good to be holy. Beware, they would say. The one who drinks wisdom also drinks blood. So, the tale shifts. From magicians of storms to predators of life, from disciples of Solomon to keepers of eternal night. But that raises a haunting question. If these initiates truly became something vampiric, where did they gather? Where could such a school remain hidden for centuries, untouched by the gaze of church and empire alike? For that, we must descend deeper into the Carpathian Mountains, where caves and monasteries may still echo with the chants of the forbidden. Or, hidden in the Carpathians, the school in the mountains. The Carpathian Mountains have always been more than just stone and snow. For centuries, they've been painted as the silent guardians of secrets, their misty ridges concealing what no city dared to claim. If a hidden school of Solomon truly existed, this was the perfect cradle. Caves like cathedrals, forests thicker than cathedrals' walls, and paths that twisted like labyrinths only the initiated could read. Peasants said the mountains swallowed people whole, and sometimes those people came back different. The Solomonari myths tell of a secret school of magicians, tucked away from the eyes of priests, where ancient sorcery was not whispered, but thundered against stone walls. Travelers in Romanian folklore described abandoned monasteries with doors half buried by vines, windows shattered but glowing faintly with torchlight. They swore they saw shadows moving in those ruins long after the bells had stopped ringing. Were these monks who never left, or disciples of the vampire school, continuing lessons no priest ever taught? Some villagers said the earth itself conspired to hide these places. Storms would brew when strangers wandered too close, or wolves would appear from nowhere, driving them away. And perhaps that's why the Carpathian secrets endured. They were guarded not just by walls, but by nature itself. Imagine descending into a cave with only a lantern, the air damp, the ground uneven. Suddenly, you find carvings on the walls, strange sigils resembling the Solomon seal, spirals, serpents, and stars. The deeper you go, the stronger the smell of burned herbs, until you reach a chamber that feels almost prepared. Folklore insists that this is where the occult Romania took root, underground halls where students gathered around altars not of wood, but of stone, stained with rituals that weren't quite forgotten. And those who entered, if not ready, would often never come out. Some said the mountain didn't let them. Think of universities today, campuses, libraries, open courtyards. Now flip it. The school of vampires was said to have no doors, no bookshelves, no sunlight. Its classrooms were caverns lit by blue flames. Its libraries were veins filled with memory. Its lessons were chants echoing from the bones of those who failed. Doesn't that sound strange, yet disturbingly possible? Knowledge doesn't always grow in sunlight. Sometimes it thrives in shadows, where it's harder to destroy. And if you've ever stood in an old cathedral and felt a chill in the silence, imagine multiplying that by 10. underground, with only the hum of voices keeping you company. The people of Transylvania never dismissed these stories. To them, the hidden school of Solomon was as real as the wolves in the forest. Mothers warned their children not to stray near caves, not because of bears, but because of those who study below. Even shepherds swore they heard chants while grazing their flocks on the higher slopes. One old tale speaks of a boy who chased a lost sheep into a cave and stumbled onto a gathering, pale men circling a fire that gave no heat, chanting names too heavy for his tongue. He left the cave, but his hair turned white overnight. He never spoke again. It's tempting to say these were exaggerations, but consider how folklore always points to some truth. The dark folklore Romania didn't thrive because people enjoyed scaring themselves. It thrived because something was happening in those mountains. Whether it was a cult, a monastery of heretics, or a true vampire occultism circle, something left its mark deep in the Carpathians. The locals knew better than to laugh. They whispered instead. And when you realize how persistent these whispers are, you can't help but wonder if a secret school of magicians still chants in silence today. So the picture sharpens. SOLOMONARI not only existed in myth, but had a place, a sanctuary carved in mountain stone where forbidden lessons lived on. But what exactly were those lessons? If books weren't their tools, then what was? The answer, whispered with trembling lips, always came back to one thing: blood. 5. Blood as initiation, the vampiric rite of Solomon. Blood has always carried more weight than ink. In the traditions of the hidden school of Solomon, stories say the first lesson wasn't spoken but tasted. The Solomonari myths whisper that disciples didn't graduate by memorizing chants or reciting prayers. They proved themselves through blood rituals that bound them to their masters. Imagine kneeling in a cavern deep within the Carpathian Mountains, torches flickering, as a chalice filled not with wine, but with crimson life is passed from hand to trembling hand. This wasn't symbolic, like the chalices of the church. It was literal. And for the villagers who dared to speak of it, this was the moment when magicians became something more, or something less. The logic of these rites was simple but chilling. Words can lie, but blood never does. The vampire school believed blood carried memory, power, and obedience. By drinking from their master, initiates were said to absorb not only vitality but also fragments of forbidden knowledge. Think about how families pass on stories, how teachers leave their mark on students. Now imagine all of that compressed into a single swallow of blood, binding student and teacher forever. To the outside world, it was monstrous. To the disciples, it was liberation, a way to inherit truths too dangerous to be written down. Even the King Solomon occult tradition hinted at this paradox. If the Solomon seal was the key to command angels and demons, then blood was the ink that signed the contract. Some accounts from Romanian folklore describe rituals where initiates would carve the seal into their skin, allowing blood to flow as proof of their devotion. Can you picture it? A circle of pale students watching as each new member bled onto the stone floor, the symbol glowing faintly as though the mountain itself acknowledged the pact. These weren't fairy tales to the villagers. They were warnings. Never follow the men who travel with silence in their eyes. Of course, outsiders saw only horror, but for the Solomon's hidden disciples, the act of drinking blood was framed as enlightenment. Just as a book feeds the mind and food feeds the body, blood was believed to feed the soul. Through it, disciples accessed the occult Romania few dared to imagine. It's unsettling to think that the most sacred act of their initiation mirrored and mocked the church's Eucharist. While priests lifted chalices of wine, deep underground others lifted chalices of life itself. The irony was not lost on anyone, and perhaps that's why the church feared them so much. But blood was not only about receiving, it was also about offering. The Carpathian secrets suggest that disciples were required to give as much as they took. Masters would drink from their students, creating a cycle of power exchange that blurred every boundary between teacher and follower, human and inhuman. This reciprocity wasn't only symbolic, it ensured loyalty. After all, how do you betray the one who carries your blood inside them? Loyalty written in contracts can break. Loyalty written in veins cannot. That's the genius, or the curse, of the vampire occultism tied to the Solomonari. Some stories even describe the blood itself as changing. Villagers whispered that once someone joined the school of vampires, their blood grew colder, darker, resistant to illness, even luminous under moonlight. Mothers warned their children not to share food or drink with strangers whose hands were too cold, fearing it might be one of Solomon's disciples. And if you've ever wondered why vampire tales in Romania sound different than in Western Europe, this is the reason. Here, vampirism wasn't born of monsters in graves, but of ancient sorcery and initiations carried through blood. So if blood was the foundation of this dark folklore Romania, then the seal was the lock that made the door unbreakable. And while these rites made the Solomonari unforgettable, the question that lingers is, how far did the Solomon seal itself extend their reach? Was it simply a mark of mastery, or a true key to open the gates between life and death? That's the mystery we're about to step into next. 6. The Seal of Solomon, a sigil beyond angels and demons. The Solomon seal has often been painted as a symbol of wisdom, the hexagram used to summon angels or bind demons. But in the Solomonari myths, it wasn't merely a tool, it was the very backbone of their power. Villagers in Romanian folklore whispered that the seal glowed in the dark caverns of the Carpathian Mountains, etched not on parchment, but carved into stone altars slick with wax and blood. For the hidden school of Solomon, this sigil was more than geometry. It was the doorway itself. And once you step through a doorway, you never come back the same. Some initiates believed the seal wasn't drawn by hand, but awakened. They claimed it appeared on their skin during the blood rituals of the vampire school, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Imagine that, a mark that didn't wash off, that no blade could cut away, a reminder that your soul was claimed by both wisdom and night. To the villagers, those who bore the mark were untouchable. Some even crossed themselves when such men passed, as if warding off not just demons, but something worse, a man who had already crossed the threshold. The King Solomon occult tradition speaks of the seal as a weapon, but here in occult Romania, it became a key. It opened doors to storms, yes, but also to the world of the dead. Folklore says that those who carried it could walk cemeteries without fear, speaking to ancestors, pulling secrets from skulls like pages from books. In the dark folklore Romania, the dead weren't gone. They were a library. And the seal was the library card, granting the Solomonari knowledge that even angels and demons couldn't give freely. Think about that for a moment. Wisdom not from heaven, not from hell, but from silence itself. Picture a disciple in the cavern school, standing before an altar marked with the seal. He places his hand upon it, and suddenly visions flood his mind. Wars not yet fought, storms not yet born, deaths not yet mourned. The Solomonari and vampires were feared because they didn't just know the present, they drank from the future. That's why kings feared them, why priests cursed them. Who controls the unknown controls the living, and the seal, with its perfect symmetry, was the lock and the key combined. But symbols aren't passive, they shape those who carry them. The Solomon's hidden disciples were said to change once they bore the seal. Their eyes grew sharper, their voices heavier, as though the mountains themselves spoke through them. Even their presence shifted the air, a chill that made candles flicker. And villagers swore that animals, dogs, horses, even wolves, lowered their heads in submission when a marked Solomonari passed. That wasn't respect, it was instinct. Nature itself recognized the sigil's authority. Now, here's a thought to twist your spine. What if the seal wasn't Solomon's at all? What if it was older, adopted and reshaped by him, and later hidden inside these mountain traditions? That would explain why it resonates in so many cultures, from Jewish mysticism to Romanian magic, always carrying echoes of power beyond simple faith. Maybe Solomon didn't create the seal. Maybe he uncovered it, and the secret school of magicians only preserved what they were never meant to own. After all, true symbols don't belong to men. Men belong to them. So, when you hear the term Seal of Solomon, don't think of a quaint star on a page. Think of a gate carved into the flesh of a disciple, glowing in the dark, pulling him closer to realms not meant for the living. Because if the seal could open doors, it also invited enemies. And that's why the church feared the Solomonari more than any storm, not for the magics they commanded, but for the doors they refused to close. 7. Suppression and persecution. Why the church feared them. The church has always feared what it cannot control, and the Solomonari myths were no exception. In sermons whispered through the valleys of Romanian folklore, priests warned their flocks that these men of the hidden school of Solomon were not students of God, but servants of the night. Yet, strangely, their words carried an undertone of desperation. Why? Because despite the condemnations, the villagers still sought them out. In times of drought, who could bring rain? In times of plague, who could ease suffering? Not always the priests. And so, the Solomonari became rivals, dangerous not only in power but in influence. It wasn't enough for the church to brand them heretics. They had to erase them. Records were burned, names struck from manuscripts, caves sealed under stone. Still, the occult Romania refused to die. People spoke of inquisitors who marched into the Carpathian Mountains to hunt down the school of vampires, only to vanish, never returning. Some said the storms themselves turned against them, tearing down torches and scattering soldiers like leaves in the wind. To the villagers, this was proof. You don't persecute myths. You only persecute what breathes. The irony, of course, is that the very persecution gave strength to the legend. Every story of a burned disciple only made the dark folklore Romania grow sharper. Mothers told their children not just to fear the Solomonari, but to respect them. After all, if the church feared them so much, then surely they had a power greater than prayer. Imagine being a villager, weighing the promise of rain from a man with glowing eyes against the threat of excommunication from a priest. Which would you choose when your children were starving? This tension kept the legends alive. And so, the Solomonari lived between condemnation and necessity. The church's hunters painted them as monsters, even calling them sons of demons. Yet in quiet villages, bread and salt were still left outside doors when storms brewed, offerings for the wandering disciple who might pass through. That's how the Solomon's hidden disciples survived, not by defying the church directly, but by slipping between the cracks of fear and need. The people couldn't risk praising them openly, but they couldn't afford to ignore them either. Even more dangerous to the church was the King Solomon occult connection. If these men truly carried the mark of Solomon, if the Solomon seal was etched into their rites, then their authority wasn't demonic, but biblical. And that terrified the priests more than any dragon or vampire tale. How do you argue against power rooted in the very king your own scripture praises? The church had no answer. All they could do was condemn, hoping fire and chains could silence what ink and sermons could not. But whispers say some records survived. Hidden in the archives of Rome, sealed away from public eyes, manuscripts still exist that detail trials of men accused of being Solomonari. These texts speak of rituals of blood, of seals that bind the storm, of initiation through darkness. Why keep these records hidden if they were nothing but superstition? Perhaps because myths become dangerous when written down, and even more dangerous when believed. The Carpathian secrets weren't meant for casual readers. So, despite centuries of persecution, the Solomonari were never fully erased. They lived on in hushed words, in strange symbols carved on old walls, in the flicker of fear in a priest's eyes when thunder cracked too close to the church roof. And while the church claimed victory, the people knew better. Shadows don't die that easily, but the real question is, if they were never fully destroyed, where did their traces go? The answer lies in the echo of stories passed from lips to lips, the very folklore that still carries their presence today. 8. Echoes in folklore, Romanian legends of the Solomonari. The villagers of old Romania never needed books to remember. Their memory lived in whispers, in fireside tales, in the kind of stories that cling to the night air long after the fire has gone out. It was in these tales that the Solomonari myths survived, woven into the fabric of Romanian folklore like stubborn threads that refused to break. People spoke of pale men wandering the valleys of the Carpathian Mountains, their cloaks heavy with mist, their staffs carved with symbols of the Solomon's seal. These weren't strangers. They were legends walking in silence, proof that the hidden school of Solomon had never really closed its doors. Children were warned not to stare at them, not because they were evil, but because to lock eyes with a Solomonari meant opening a door you might never close. Grandmothers told stories of travelers who vanished after following them into forests, never seen again. Shepherds whispered of nights when lightning cracked without clouds, and they knew a disciple of the school of vampires was near, practicing ancient sorcery in secret. And though fear filled their words, so did awe, because every storm they brought meant crops would grow, rivers would swell, and hunger would be pushed back a little longer. One legend tells of a village struck by endless drought. The priest prayed for rain, but the skies stayed cruel. Then one night, a man cloaked in black appeared, asking for nothing more than bread and milk. By morning, thunder rolled and rain poured for 3 days. When the villagers went to thank him, he was gone, leaving only strange markings on the church's stones. Those markings, locals said, were part of the occult Romania, a sign that a Solomonari had passed through, offering mercy where the church had failed. Was he a vampire? A magician? Both. The story never agreed, and that's what made it last. Other tales were darker. Some spoke of children disappearing near caves, their laughter echoing for days, even after they were gone. The blame always fell on the Solomon's hidden disciples, said to recruit the gifted or cursed into their fold. Parents left offerings at cave entrances, honey, bread, sometimes even livestock, begging protection from the ones who walked between man and night. Strangely, when these offerings were made, storms avoided the village, as though the pact was honored. This became part of the dark folklore Romania, a cycle of fear and appeasement, never broken. What fascinates scholars today is how consistent these stories are. Across villages miles apart, the descriptions match: tall men, pale faces, cloaks heavy with symbols, their voices low and commanding. Were all these peasants sharing the same hallucination? Or did the vampire occultism of the Solomonari truly leave footprints too deep to erase? Even centuries later, some ruins in the Carpathian secrets carry symbols etched into stone that bear uncanny resemblance to the Solomon's seal. To a villager, that wasn't coincidence. That was testimony carved in silence. Folklore also insists that the Solomonari could bend animals to their will. Cows would kneel, wolves would follow, horses would freeze mid-gallop at their presence. In one story, a raven was said to land on a disciple's shoulder and whisper secrets of the future into his ear. Whether you believe it or not, this paints a portrait of figures who weren't simply men, but something closer to forces of nature, carrying the same weight as storms and shadows. And in Transylvanian legends, nature itself obeys the ones who know its truest name. So the people remembered, even when the church tried to silence them. And these stories, passed from generation to generation, kept the Solomonari and vampires alive in the collective memory of a land already steeped in mystery. But if the echoes of folklore have lasted this long, then perhaps the tradition itself has never fully died. Which brings us to the most haunting question of all. What if the school wasn't destroyed, but simply hidden, still alive, waiting in silence for those who dare to seek it? 9. Occult continuity, the school that never died. Legends rarely survive without a reason. If the hidden school of Solomon was nothing more than imagination, why do its echoes stretch across centuries in Romanian folklore? The truth is, whispers insist the school never truly died. Instead, it shifted, hiding in the cracks of empires, resurfacing in remote monasteries, and cloaking itself in secret brotherhoods. The Solomonari myths describe not a final destruction, but a careful retreat, like fire hidden under ashes, waiting for the right breath to ignite again. Even today, some say those ashes glow faintly in the Carpathian Mountains, where the mist covers more than just stone. Picture a disciple carrying his knowledge not in books, but in veins. He doesn't need libraries or temples, he is the library. That's how the school of vampires could endure when armies marched and churches burned. Each student, bound by blood rituals, carried the legacy within, passing it to the next when the time came. And isn't that the most efficient way to preserve forbidden knowledge? Paper can be burned, stone can crumble, but blood endures. This is why the vampire occultism, tied to Solomonari, still feels alive, because it was designed to survive persecution by becoming part of the human body itself. Even in modern times, there are strange hints. Researchers in occult Romania point to small groups in Eastern Europe who gather under the guise of cultural societies, but whose symbols trace back to the Solomon's seal. A carved star here, a chant there, an initiation whispered in old dialects, remnants of something older than the organizations themselves. It's easy to dismiss them as eccentric clubs, but folklore has a way of hiding truths in plain sight. After all, isn't every great tradition disguised until the world is ready for it? Consider how universities preserve knowledge today. Hidden manuscripts in archives, professors who specialize in a single subject for decades. The Solomon's hidden disciples may have done the same, but with a darker curriculum. Instead of physics, they studied storms. Instead of medicine, they practiced blood pacts. Instead of history, they remembered what others were forced to forget. And just as modern students pass through rituals of exams and graduations, their initiations demanded veins, scars, and silence. It's not so different, only more terrifying. Villages in Transylvania still share stories of men who appear only at night, men who speak languages no one else understands. They say these figures vanish when questioned too deeply, as though the shadows themselves protect them. Could these be descendants of the Solomonari and vampires, carrying the Carpathian secrets into modern nights? If so, then the ancient sorcery didn't die. It simply adapted, learning to walk in business suits instead of cloaks, traveling by car instead of horseback, whispering online instead of in caves. The setting changes, but the legacy survives. And here's the most unsettling part. Continuity doesn't always mean presence in flesh. Some claim the Solomon's seal itself is a living current, passed down like a frequency. To connect with it is to step into the school. Whether or not you've ever seen its halls, this means the secret school of magicians may exist not as a place, but as a state of mind, activated by ritual, symbol, or blood. If that's true, then the school never needed walls in the first place, only willing vessels, and vessels, as history proves, are never in short supply. So, the question isn't whether the school still exists, it's how it hides. Is it in the shadows of forgotten monasteries? In the veins of secret families? In the chants of occult circles that outsiders dismiss as harmless? Folklore hints at all of these, but perhaps the most haunting clue lies not in continuity of place, but in continuity of power. For power, once tasted, is never surrendered. Which leaves us with the final thought: if the school has endured, then what form has its ultimate lesson taken? Some say it's no longer about storms or dragons, but about drinking eternity itself. 10. The final reflection: knowledge, written in blood. When people hear of vampires, they picture fangs and coffins. But the Solomonari myths suggest something deeper, that vampirism wasn't about monsters hiding in graves, but about the hunger for eternity, disguised as wisdom. In the hidden school of Solomon, the greatest lesson was never written in books. It was etched into veins, carved into memory, and sealed with the pulse of blood rituals. Think about it. Ink fades, parchment burns, but blood carries its secrets forward. That's why the villagers believed the Solomonari were more than men. They were libraries of flesh, guardians of forbidden knowledge, walking archives of the night. The vampire school didn't feed on bodies for survival alone. Folklore insists they fed on souls, memories and experiences, absorbing not just life but essence. Imagine meeting someone who could remember not only their own past, but fragments of yours, stolen through a single touch or glance. This is the vampire occultism of the Solomonari, not just the theft of blood, but the theft of being. And doesn't that sound more terrifying than the fangs of a beast? It means you could be forgotten by history, not because you were unimportant, but because someone else consumed the very echo of your existence. The King Solomon occult tradition gave them the framework, but the transformation turned it into something unrecognizable. The Solomon's seal wasn't simply a geometric figure, it became a living bond, a signature written in veins, linking disciples to a lineage of power that outlasted kingdoms. In occult Romania, this symbol wasn't just proof of initiation, it was proof of belonging. Once marked, a disciple wasn't an individual anymore. They were part of an eternal current flowing from Solomon himself to the hidden students of the Carpathian Mountains, and perhaps even to those who walk among us today. What makes this final reflection so haunting is how close it hits to human desire. Isn't everyone, in some way, searching for immortality? Some chase it in monuments, others in books, some in the digital echoes of social media. The school of vampires promised a shortcut: immortality through blood, through memory, through consuming what others leave behind. And in a way, aren't we all guilty of a softer version of this? Reading someone else's story, wearing someone else's wisdom, feeding on experiences that were never ours. That's why the dark folklore Romania still resonates, because it feels less like myth and more like a mirror. The Carpathian secrets didn't say the Solomonari wanted to destroy humanity. They said the Solomonari wanted to preserve themselves, even if it meant draining others in the process. There's a chilling honesty in that. Where most faiths speak of sacrifice for others, this tradition spoke of sacrifice for the self. And maybe that's why the church feared them so fiercely. Not because they were monsters, but because they represented a truth too raw to preach. The hunger for survival is stronger than the hunger for salvation. One tale says that when a Solomonari finally fell, his disciples didn't bury him. They drank him. Every drop of his blood was shared, ensuring his wisdom and essence would not die with the flesh. To outsiders, this was barbaric. To the insiders, it was graduation, the final exam, the completion of the cycle. Imagine carrying not just your own life, but the lives of everyone who came before you. Imagine speaking with the voices of centuries vibrating in your chest. This was the true immortality they sought, and it was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. So perhaps the last truth of the Solomon's hidden disciples is not that they were vampires in the Gothic sense, but vampires of meaning, of memory, of soul. They fed not only to live, but to know, to preserve, to continue. And if even a fragment of this is true, then maybe the secret school of magicians never closed. Maybe it lives wherever blood is spilled, wherever memory is stolen, wherever knowledge is written not on paper, but in flesh. And that thought alone invites the question, what if the initiation isn't just theirs? What if, in listening to these stories, you've already taken the first sip, so now you've seen it? The whispers of the Solomonari myths, the forbidden halls of the hidden school of Solomon, the blood rites, the storms, and the echoes of vampiric power carved into the Carpathian mountains. But here's the real question. What do you do with this knowledge? Do you file it away as just another story? Or do you let it challenge the way you see history, faith, and even your own hunger for power and survival? Because legends like these don't survive for centuries by accident. They survive because they carry truths we're not supposed to face. And maybe that's why you're here, because some part of you feels that pull toward forbidden knowledge, toward the mysteries the world pretends don't exist. Isn't it strange how the church tried to erase these stories? And yet here you are, listening, learning, remembering. Ask yourself, if the Solomonari truly fed on knowledge as much as blood, aren't we all guilty of the same thirst? Every book you read, every secret you uncover, every truth you chase, isn't that a form of vampirism too? The difference is only in degree, not in kind. And that's what makes this legend so dangerous. It's not only about them, it's about us. So I'll leave you with this. Would you dare step into a school like that if it still existed today? Would you drink the chalice if it promised not just life, but eternity? Or would you turn away, content to let the shadows guard their secrets forever? Think about it and share your thoughts, because sometimes the best answers come not from the story itself, but from the questions it leaves behind. If this journey through occult Romania and the secrets of Solomon's hidden disciples has stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to this channel, activate the notifications, and keep walking with me through the doors of the unknown, because tonight we opened one vault, but many more remain.